We did it. We're at the finale of the Acolyte season 1. Hopefully, just the season finale, not the series finale. I am the Acolyte Vactor. I'm here with the best panel of Star Wars pundits that you could possibly have. Let's start with Darth Schaff, the Shilmatic Darth Schaff. How you doing, Schaff?
I'm good. Happy to be here. Thanks for having me, Vector.
Yeah. And we have from fusefilm.com, Kevin Call. How are you, sir?
What's up, my friends? I'm ready to get into this. It's going to be awesome.
Oh, yeah. And this is the High Republic expert, Super Tim. How are you doing today, Tim?
I'm fantastic. I'm happy to be here once again.
Perfect. All right. So let's get right into it, boys. What did we think of the finale? Let's kind of go round robin style. Shoff, let's start off. We're just going to go around the circle. What did you think overall of this episode and the series actually as well?
Hated it. No, I'm just kidding.
You lied.
No, I didn't love it though. Overall, like as a show, like in terms of comparing it to other Star Wars, TV shows we've seen on Disney Plus, whatever, like it is far from the best. It's not the worst, but it's just kind of middle of the road for me. And I felt like the finale had some great moments, specifically the lightsaber battles.
Yeah.
But all in all, I felt like the season finale left too many questions unanswered, and their explanations for the way they answered some questions was unsatisfying to me. So that's just kind of where I'm at.
Yeah. Hopefully, if we get a season 2, they'll kind of answer some of those questions.
I would be shocked if
we don't know.
Honestly, I do not think it's going to happen. I personally am in the camp that season 2 is a pipe dream and we'll never see the light of day.
I think I don't know. I might disagree with that, but we can talk about that later. I have different varying opinions.
Say it ain't so, Shuff. Say it ain't so.
Yeah. All right, Kevin, what did you think about episode 8 of The Acolyte?
Yeah, I actually I thought it was one of the better episodes of the series. I felt like it had all of the beats of a good story. It had tension, it had some resolution. It introduced some cliffhangery things and teased some things for the future, which I always think is great. Leaves you wanting more. I felt like it was a little predictable. I kind of knew what, based on where we were coming into at that point, like what was going to happen. So I wasn't really surprised by anything that occurred. I was more surprised by some of the choices that they made, like the cameo that we'll talk about later. And just, again, some of the creative choices. As far as the series, and I really hope this to our fans here doesn't sound like I'm backtracking at all. I've been very complimentary and mostly positive throughout the entire review of this series, but I think as a whole, now that I've consumed 8 episodes, if I give it, I don't know if I'm going to do out of 10 or a 5 or an A minus, B minus, whatever, but I think it's just middle of the road. I just give it whatever the average score would be. I feel like it's that. There was a lot of really good things that I think that they attempted to do, the battles, the action, bringing in those, not focusing on Skywalker level type characters, things like that. The setting of the High Republic era, I think all of those things were great choices. I think the undoing of the show was and I beat this drum. 30-minute episodes, I think, was just not enough to invest, and I think they could have told this whole story like in 3 episodes if they were an hour long, which could have allowed it to really expand into something bigger. Because as you're starting to get interested in characters like Chimere and all of the things going on there, and again seeing Osha turn into the Acolyte at the very end, like it's almost like, well, that's what I wanted to see. And it's like, so it's kind of like I almost want season 2 because I want to see that more than I wanted to see the setup. So I think, like, I give it an average. There's definitely some messy stuff. There's definitely some not some great stuff. But is it bad Star Wars? Is it bad I believe me, I've seen worse. Like there's go watch a Hallmark movie. We could see a Hallmark Star Wars. That would be interesting. We'll talk about that some other time. But I'd love to pitch that. But yeah, I just think it was average. And that's where I'll leave it. So
Okay.
You have to
Super
see if
Tim.
Candace Cameron is available for the Hallmark Star Wars movie.
Yeah,
Candace Cameron
maybe.
doesn't do Hallmark anymore, Shop. She's moved on to the GAC.
I knew Tim would know that information. I was waiting for him to pounce.
Yes, Tim, tell us your thoughts.
This episode was really good. I was enthralled for pretty much the beginning, and I really enjoyed it. Like Kevin, there were choices with certain characters that I was like, and we'll talk about particularly Vernestra Rowe.
Oh yeah.
And I as someone who's been exposed to that character in novels and comics and things, like how she was presented, not just in this episode, but throughout the season, just left me feeling cold. And like, it makes sense that this is where her character would end up, but I would have preferred if I had known that, sometime next year, after the High Republic novels are all finished. But overall, I think I love the choices. There were other choices that I really loved. The lightsaber fight was great. Seeing a kyber crystal bleed, and overall, like the whole season, since I've been absent for the whole season, I think seeing so many these Star Wars elements that I've only seen in comics and in books, and seeing them on not the big screen, but in live action was really satisfying to me. And I enjoyed this episode. I really hope season 2 happens. I want it to, because I really like where it's possibly going.
Yes, man. I hope something in the High Republic Phase 3 leads into this of her character arc of how she got to where she is in the Acolyte. I think that would really improve this season. And we talk, Tim, you and I did the review of the Bad Batch season 3, and we always talk about one thing improving another thing. And we talked about that kind of leading up to Rise of Skywalker. And then this has a little bit of stuff in it as well.
Do you
Okay.
I was sorry, Vactor. Do you think I love what you said there, and I want to pick on it for a second. One thing improving another thing. We all grew up in the prequel era, and we saw the fallout of that.
Yes.
But I feel like the prequels have been so enhanced by Filoni's Clone Wars, all the animated stuff, and more additions that have kind of latched onto that, and it's enhanced the prequels. So it's like there's something to be said for that. When you get all this new content that comes in, is that it enhances and it improves something. And I don't know if the Acolyte maybe hasn't achieved that yet. Possibly it might, with other things that may latch onto it as it relates to High Republic live action content. So I'm glad you brought that up, because that's a very interesting point.
Yeah, it's definitely one that the High Republic, this is our first live action look at the High Republic era. We've seen it in novels, we've seen it in video games, comic books, but this being the first live action, it's a lot of people's first introduction to the High Republic. So I'm hoping that once it's all said and done, Phase 3 is the end of it. We'll have like a cohesive narrative and a cohesive story. But I wanted to get to some questions that I had. I took some notes, and there were things about this show overall that I loved, and there were things that it kind of left me wondering, will these be
You mean the
answered
ending of
in
every
season
episode?
2?
How it just ended?
Yeah.
That's I think
Annoying.
the
Credits.
major I think to me the major like gripe with the Acolyte is the way that the format overall of how the story is told. And so it's like almost the production value of it, even though it had $180 million budget, it still felt like a TV show. It didn't feel like a movie. Whereas when you look at Andor, that looks like a movie. And I'm like, how did they do that? Like, is it just the cinematography?
You see where the money's going.
Yeah.
Well,
where is
I
that?
think their entire
happening?
budget was in that final episode in the rings
That was a
orbit
Dude,
theme.
that
fantastic
was
sequence.
incredible.
That was amazing.
I think that was
Yeah.
I think
I
that was
love
like
that.
90% of whatever budget they had, and then they were just
Yeah.
like, "Can we do the rest in
I
green screen?"
I think they didn't want it to be the volume. I think they really invested a lot in the visual effects and all that kind of stuff, as well as like the locations
Yeah.
and stuff like that, real locations and whatnot. But yeah, that scene, I'm glad you mentioned that, Shoff. That was incredible. So
100%. And it's like, I wish we could get that throughout the whole series, because if we had, there are certain things that if this show was more consistent, I would say I would put it above Andor. I know, Tim, your kind of view on Andor was a little bit lower than most of ours. Did you? I don't know if you ever have said it on the show. What was it about Andor specifically that kind of lowered it on your list of favorites?
It just didn't feel like, I didn't feel like the story deserved to be told in a Star Wars setting. It didn't feel like a Star Wars story to me.
that's
Like
interesting.
it could have been easily told in, in a different, like in its own space. Like,
Right.
like this young rebel trying to bring down this empire. Like it felt like it could have been told in a different space, and it like in a Battlestar Galactica kind of way.
Do you think
Right.
though that you feel that way because there was no real Jedi presence, no real like Force antics going on?
I think that's what makes Star Wars unique, is that space fantasy aspect, and to have
it was
it
too grounded.
It's too grounded.
It's too grounded. It's too grounded for me. And I like grounded things. Like Babylon 5 and Battlestar Galactica are like my favorite shows, and those are really grounded. But I think you have, if you're going to do Star Wars, it has to have that space fantasy element, and that, because that's what makes Star Wars unique.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think if this show, like I said, if this one had been more consistent production wise, the pacing issues of the cutting at the end of each episode, it felt, man, almost as if there was not enough. So they cut it up, like they filmed it as a movie, let's say, and then they cut it to make it to fit into the streaming model of 8 episodes. Because we even see Andor is what, 12 episodes. There's different ways that you can do it. You don't
Those
have to
feel like they
necessarily
should be, like those 12 episodes felt like they should have been like 4 movies or something. Just
and
the way they were.
Ahsoka
It's
was
a
8
lot.
episodes like this.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well,
I wanted to say something, like the thing that I felt like about the Acolyte that really I think I've come to grips with is the premise itself. Leslie Headland said from day one that she was interested in telling Kill Bill meets Frozen. And I'm thinking to myself that not only how it was executed, now seeing the 8 episodes, but like, was that in itself a really good story to put within the Star Wars universe? Or was there something else that could have been told? Like, to me, there was a B story going on in the Acolyte the whole time that I actually was way more interested in. There is a scene where Vernestra is literally talking to was it Raincroft, the senator, and like Raincourt, thank you. And like getting a lot of like pushback from the Senate and everything. I'm like, wow, that's actually really, is that an interesting thing? And it was just like a quick flyby thing. And I was like, that's interesting to me. And then to see like when she would have throwaway lines about the politics going on around the Jedi, like all of those things were more interesting to me than this like revenge plot and witches and all of those other things. But to Tim's point though, there was certain Star Wars things I wanted to see, which is I wanted to see cool lightsaber battles. I wanted to see new things around the Force that I hadn't seen before, being that it was the High Republic era. I'm like, man, this is when the Jedi is like at the height of its power and the use of the Force. So I want to see some cool stuff. And you got tastes of those things, but again, the story itself, I feel like the B story was more compelling than what the A story was. And it's like, we didn't get really much of that B story. Who's Chimere? What was his relationship with Vernestra? How did that all go down? Like, again, those things were more interesting to me than the 2 sisters and, all of that kind of stuff. Like and then everybody died. All the Jedi that we were supposed to care about, like they die at the end, and I just, didn't really care. At the end of the day, could care less. So
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah. Real quick. So the Andor thing we talked about with like structure of a season. Interestingly enough, season 2 of Andor is being done in like 3-episode arcs, and they take place like after the 3 episodes, there's a span of time. And then the next 3 episodes are like, and then there's another span of time leading up to
That actually sounds really cool to me.
Yeah, leading up to the events of Rogue One. So like by the end of Andor season 2, you're basically like walking into the plot of Rogue One, which is really, really cool. So I'm excited to see what they do with Andor season 2 in that regard. But also to Kevin's point about the B storyline, 100%, that senator should have showed up way earlier than episode 8.
Absolutely. Yeah.
That is, from a narrative perspective, a complete disregard for like how the plot works. And like, you can't just introduce a character who is a meaningful character, who has a meaningful conversation with a lead, that you can tell that if there was a second season, they would be like a series regular. Like there was too much put on that back end in like a hope and a prayer that there's going to be a season 2. And if you really were trying to tell the story of an A and B storyline and really give enough focus, I mean, Vernestra barely had anything to do either. There were huge spans of time throughout this season where we didn't even see her, and all of that stuff that she's doing on her end. Like there needs to be a balance between those storylines that they tell, but they were focused so heavily on Osha.
A balance of the Force.
Yes. Yes.
Well, and to your point,
they were focused on Osha and May so much, and I hate to say it, but this actress does not have what you need to have, that special like whatever to portray not only one but 2 interesting characters and lead a show.
She's not a Tatiana Maslany with Orphan Black.
No,
that's what I think that's what they wanted with Osha and May, and to your point, but I don't think they got it. But I felt like the scene at the end where they're like, oh, I'm never going to see you again. I felt like I was supposed to feel something, but the acting just didn't deliver. Now that I'm thinking about it, on those emotional beats, like the music was there, the dialogue was there, but the acting wasn't there.
Yeah.
The thing about Andor, just going back to that initial part of the conversation that I'll end with my thoughts on this, why I liked Andor and why I think as a streaming series for Star Wars was just perfectly executed. There is a scene with Stellan Skarsgård where he's talking to one of the other rebels, and he's saying that he's not going to see the end result of this, that he's given up everything. And he goes on, and it's, to me, like, how did he not get an Emmy Award for this?
Yes.
How is this not like one of the best streaming moments? And I mean, I watch a lot of stuff like that's not space fantasy and sci-fi and all that. Like, it's equal or better than anything you would see in Game of Thrones or any of these other shows that we all watch, Yellowstone, stuff like that. And I think that's where Andor really succeeded, was that they were able to really not only elevate the acting, the writing, but also make those grounded moments where you really felt the stakes that were happening. And when I compare that to The Acolyte, there just wasn't any of those moments. There was glimpses of it. Scenes with Soul where he's literally like going from this compassionate, loving Jedi to this tortured soul. And
for lack of a better word.
Yeah, and anything with Manny Jacinto was really well done, and I think that's a testament to his acting skill and how he took to that character, going from this quirky smuggler, apothecary type guy to this really sort of melancholy sort of Sith Lord that's looking for a pupil. We talked about it in one of the last episodes. Shoff and I were like, that scene where he's in the pool butt naked, like, yeah, there's a lot of humor there that you can have, but like at the same time, like there's a lot of seduction there, and it's very compelling to me to see that, because it's a different type of seduction that Palpatine gave Anakin. And that's really the only dark side seduction that we've seen in live action. And, you know, so like I want to see more of that kind of stuff. And again, like I just didn't feel like we got enough of it. And I think, again, going back to your question, Justin, why is Andor more superior than Acolyte? I think again, it's just they really stretched the writing and the acting and in the moments where the stakes felt real.
Also,
Yeah.
the structure of the season, I think, was a little strange. Looking back, it was definitely a little strange. Like the way the flashbacks were placed.
Yeah.
Yep.
Like for the most part of the last week's episode, I was just like, okay, like we're seeing from a different perspective. But the reason you have a flashback is to tell you something new that's going to inform the narrative going forward. And
Yeah,
for most of that episode, I was like, okay, I'm not learning anything new here. But then when Sol killed Mother Anastasia, I'm like, okay, here's the new thing.
Yeah, and that goes back to, like I was saying, that my biggest issue with this show is the format and the structure of everything.
Yeah.
Both twofold on that. Number one, that it's like fit into a streaming model and instead of a movie. That's number one. Then number two is the mystery flashback jumping back and forth in time narratively. And when we're going from week to week, we were saying kind of, okay, we're just going to wait until we get to the end, and then we're going to decide did that work or not. And I think now that we're here at the end, from what I can tell, from what everyone's saying, the jumping back and forth, I don't know if it was justified. Now that we're looking at the whole picture, did telling it that way make the story more interesting, or if we had done it from a chronological point of view, and I've seen a lot of people talking online about, man, if we had gotten to know them chronologically, like at the beginning of what they did, like we were ahead of the characters in the show. We already knew what they did on Brendock 16 years ago, and them watching them catch up to us would have been more satisfying than we were kind of, we didn't know if it was an unreliable narrator. We didn't know what was going on with the flashbacks. And here's another thing. I think they kind of wanted their cake and eat it too, as far as the flashbacks, because like Tim said, telling it from a different point of view is what we were also kind of promised, because Leslie Headland came out and said she was a big fan of Rashomon, which is the exact same thing they did in Last Jedi with Luke and Ben, telling their different sides of the story. And each side is telling their version of it. And then you're getting pieces and pieces. The way we got it in this show, it was, we don't know whose side was telling the narrative, because if you want to say it's Soul's side, like in the last episode 7, if you want to say, oh yeah, it's from the Jedi, it's from Soul's point of view, well, then they're showing places where he wasn't there. And so it's clearly not from his point of view. So what
there
was
wasn't
the
a
point
through
of that?
line with the flashbacks. There wasn't a through
Right.
line. Because and I think, you know, when episode 3 first came on, I was just like, okay, wow, we're doing a flashback here. And at first I thought, well, that's really risky, and it was, but I don't think the risk paid off, because I think the reason why you have a flashback is because you know the character already. One of my favorite books, The Way of Kings, has flashbacks, and you get to the flashback after you get to know the main character a little bit. And every book in the Stormlight Archive series, it focuses on a different character. And by the time you get to the 3rd book, it's focusing on a character that, okay, they've been telling these bits and pieces of the backstory. Now I'm getting it. Now it's satisfying. The third episode out of the gate, which if we had the 2 episodes, you know, 1 week and the second episode the next week, and then we had the 3rd one, maybe it would have worked. But because we had the first 2 in the same week, I didn't think I knew Osha and Maya's characters yet to justify that flashback. Now, the way it was placed in episode 7, I think is kind of an ideal point. And if that whole flashback was placed there, that would have worked better, because when we were talking about Virgences in episode 8 and why Soul did what he did, we understand it because we just saw that flashback last week, and I think that would have worked better.
Let me ask this question. Did Soul do anything wrong? Like, at the end of the episode, there's this, obviously a cover up happening. And he gets sort of
No, that's not a cover up. She threw him under the bus.
Yeah, threw him under the bus, basically. Like, he's the one who did this whole thing, and we took care of it. And he offed himself, and we're gonna close the book on this. I feel like he was justified, right? Like, you have these witches. I mean, again, like, I have to look at this under a very clear lens of what is the Jedi's mandate, right? They're peacekeeping force. They're there to protect how the force is being used, whether you agree with that or not. That's what they're there to do. And they are on this planet investigating. And I'm going to say this very clearly to all you fans out there who think that the Chosen One stuff and all that is completely dead because of this show, because it's not. Vergence based on the location, not a person, but the location. They said a vergence on the planet. The planet itself was a vergence, etc. And so,
which is why Mace Windu was confused about a vergence located around a person, because it's usually around a location.
Yeah. That's right. So a vergence around the person is very specific to the prophecy of the Chosen One. Right. And that's why I don't think the choice to have the twins being artificially created by the Force infringes on Anakin's Chosen One, sort of him being the Chosen One and being the prophecy. So, but anyway, I think Soul was justified. Like, I mean, there was definitely some screw ups. Like, Torben's a bitch, and like just basically was the most worthless Jedi in the history of Jedi, outside of Mog, which we'll talk about him.
Oh, yes. Real quick, yeah. Torben reminds me of like if like the Little Rascals when they get dressed up to go to like see a movie or whatever, right? That they can't get into. When Torben is older and he's been like doing the vow of silence for like 10 years, and he's got like the beard, but he still looks like a little kid. I'm like, he's like Little Rascals in disguise right now. That's so stupid.
Where was the budget there? Like, when they did that makeup, the hair and the beard, like, that's where it's like the show is kind of frustrating in that aspect, because
cringy.
You get the concept, but it's the execution of it that we're like, man, if they had just stuck that a little bit better. I'm glad you brought this up, Kevin, because I have it in my notes. Saul, is he a hero or an idiot? I want to get Shop's thoughts first on that, and then I'll go to Tim. Is Saul justified in his actions?
So, well,
Shaw is always justified.
A combination of Shaw and Soul.
I think it's important that we take a moment to state that we were talking about like the structure of this season and the flashbacks and the purpose they play. But I also think like the flashbacks exist because we needed to, I guess, be on Soul's side. We needed to accept him and respect him and see like the wise, like teacher and leader and like how kind he is and how generous he is and how thoughtful. Like, he's different than other Jedi. Like, he cares a lot more than most of the other Jedi, as you can
more
see.
Empathetic.
Even his team of 4 people, like, he is by far the most empathetic. But I think if we had seen him stab Mother Anastasia right from the get-go, and then we have the rest of the season that we spend with him, I don't think that we would have the same.
It's fair. It's a very fair point.
The same like review of him as a character. I think that we needed to not have all the details in order for us to judge him based on his character, not based on what he'd done. So, so I think like in that aspect, the structure works, but I also agree that there's not a clear point of view on the flashbacks as they occur.
But was he justified in killing Mother Anastasia?
I don't think so, but I think he acted rashly. I think that in the moment, because obviously things were kind of like the proverbial SHIT was hitting the fan, and he was in defensive mode, and he thought, I'm sure he didn't quite know what to do because she's about to turn into a smoke monster. I know that if it were me in that scenario, I wouldn't be like, oh, everything's okay. She's just turning into
Well,
smoke.
I mean,
No,
break
I'd be
it
like,
down.
oh crap, she's turning into smoke. I better do something.
Break it down.
Mhm.
Kelnaka is like possessed, and that would
Right.
freak me out if a Wookiee with a lightsaber is possessed. Like I wouldn't even be on the planet anymore.
A Wookiee without
yeah.
a lightsaber possessed would scare the crap out of me.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. So you got that, and then on top of that, you have Torben, like I said, being a little bitch, and screwing everything up. And then, so again, what is a Jedi supposed to do? What
Dang
does
it,
Yoda say?
Torben!
Yoda says a Jedi is only to use his powers for defense, right? So I
Right.
feel like he was justified in using defense. You got dark witches. They're not Night Sisters. You don't know what they are. And he already has like knowledge of this vergence going on. So not to overshadow what you're saying, Schaff, but I think he's justified.
Yeah. Well, and you're right. And Mother Anastasia kind of, well, it gets kind of hard because you can't like say who threw the first stone, because the Jedi sort of asserted themselves into the scenario.
Fair.
It was not their
Yeah.
place to begin with. They should not have like exercised their supposed right to the children. So like if you really want to like point fingers, like the Jedi started this conflict.
Yeah, that's a good point.
But
And I
then
think that
as well,
goes-
Mother
It's not
Anastasia, like from a tennis match, like she bounced back and she fired back her volley of not possessing, but like inhabiting Torben's mind and sort of messing with him that way. And then that put everything else on edge. And then it just continued to escalate and escalate. And then, like you said, he's operating in a defensive stance. So like, yes, he's justified, but ultimately like the Jedi created this conflict. So
Right.
I kind of think
100%.
like
It's a good point.
Tim,
I
what do
just-
you
it's
think?
I just
not
got,
like
I just got shoffed.
it happens to the best of us. It's not like to what Schaff's saying about how the Jedi started this conflict, because the Jedi were just planting flowers, digging holes, pulling
ripping
weeds,
weeds.
ripping weeds, like doing anything, and then they discovered this cult, and they're like, okay, they can't use the Force, they gotta go. It's not like in Phase 2 where the Jedi were sent, to, I can't remember what planet it was, to investigate the path of the open hand, which eventually became the Nile in Phase 1 and Phase 3. It's not like they were sent there to investigate this thing. They saw what they perceived as a threat, and we're going to take them out. And I think that they handled the situation poorly. And Soul, although his motivations are sound, I think also handled the situation poorly.
Yeah, and I think Indara, to give her credit, the most underused character and actress on the entire series.
Carrie Ann Moss, man.
Yeah, like she was like, hey, we need to flag this. We need to run this up the bureaucratic flagpole here. And like, I wonder what would have happened had that have happened, right? Probably none of this. They would have said, hey, get your butts back to Coruscant. We don't want you, or just like
listen to Torben. He knows what he's talking about.
Or it would have been a Star Trek thing where it's like, hey, it's violating the Prime Directive. Like, don't engage, So like,
it's never going to stick.
Right. But again, Torben being a little bitch. So
that's
I never tire of hearing that. He is such
I'm
a
sorry.
whiny bitch.
He is just a horrible thing.
It is
So, anyway.
it is Torben and Soul's ultimate actions that caused everything. And so if they had listened to Indara, if they had listened to, hey, we need to back off, we need to consult everyone else, we need to find out, and they would have not engaged, then we wouldn't have had this. But let's just say there was no it was unavoidable, right? If you insert yourself into where Soul was at the time of the murder, I think he thought he was being defensive. He thought he was protecting the children. So yeah, I think that part is justified. I think I agree with Shaw. They just shouldn't have never been in that situation to begin with. So that is kind of that's more of the overall tragedy of what happened, was that they should have never even been there to begin with. And these are the questions that I like about this show, bringing up, are the Jedi as an institution a good thing? Are they, what are the system of checks and balances in the galaxy for the Jedi? And going back to Kevin bringing up Senator Rayencourt, that was a great. He was like the mouthpiece for that argument of who watches the Watchmen, and he like not only did he talk about like the overall like Jedi as this massive system of unchecked power, posing as a religion, a delusional cult that claims to control the uncontrollable. And then Vernestra's like, we don't control the Force. He said, no, not the Force, your emotions. That
I'm so
like
glad
when
you
he
brought
said
this up.
That was a great line. So
I'm
good.
so glad you brought this up, and I'm so because this is so paramount to the entire episode to me, because everybody's emotions were their own downfall. Because you have Soul who says, "I did this to protect you. I did this because," and he's about to say that I love you, and then he dies. And then you have Vernestra who's being ruled by her own emotions, and hopefully, it's not discovered that a Padawan that she trained has turned evil and is gone rogue. Osha's own emotions, May's own emotions, everybody's emotions were at play here, and that to me was the theme of the episode.
Yeah, 100%. And that's why I think it was probably one of the better episodes of this series, because it brought all of that up. And again, comparing it back to Andor, that to me brings the stakes up higher because you have all of those things, and it's compelling. And that's why I wanted to see more of that. When you brought up Ravencourt and all that kind of stuff, like I wanted to see more of those moments where their oversight's being questioned. Like, I loved it when they finally brought that into the Avengers, right? Like the Sokovia Accords and things like that. Like oversight, bureaucracy, those things make for compelling debate, right? On one side, you have Captain America saying, wait a minute, this isn't freedom, this is fear. And then on the other side, you have Tony Stark saying, well, listen, while we're up there kicking ass, people are getting collateral damage. There has to be
Kevin,
something.
You're mixing movies here. Freedom and Fears and Winter Soldier, dude.
I know, but it's still the same debate that carries on.
No, you're right. I couldn't help myself.
But my point being is like there is a fear that's going on in the galaxy from the politicians of this bureaucratic peacekeeping force that the Jedi has grown into has become very powerful. There's a lot of like real world history here, right? The Catholic Church. I mean, if you think about it, like who kings the king? It's the priest. And like who owns all the land? It's the church. And like, so there's a lot of like what I love it when it mirrors our own world that you get to bring these themes out into a series. Again, wasted as a B story and should have been the A story. And she chose, she being Leslie Headland, chose this little mystery and this frozen thing to be the primary construct of the Acolyte when it should have been the inverse.
Which, if it had been the inverse, then we really would have been able to see what it means for it to be a High Republic era
100%
TV show.
100%, yeah.
Because you don't feel that. Like you don't get those vibes other than maybe like the robe choice, right? Like that's it. Like there's no culture.
The armor,
the culture would have been the more time we spend on Coruscant. So
yeah.
I just want to go to Coruscant. I just want to go home.
I just want to go home, man. Is he too good for his home? But I'm so glad you brought that up. Like keeping the Jedi in check, because that's in play even in the High Republic. Because you have the Senate, certain senators who are representing something called the Republic Defense Coalition, who want to, use like armies and ships to protect the galaxy as opposed to the Jedi. And so we're seeing kind of the culmination of those kind of ideas and things. And that to me is High Republic. So yeah. But yeah, we should definitely have seen more of that. Yeah.
And that's like, again, my overall thing about the structure also ties into that of, did it need to be set in the High Republic, and did it need to be a murder mystery? You can make the argument that, okay, making it a murder mystery thriller was just an interesting narrative device, kind of like the Rogue One being like the heist film of them stealing the Death Star plans. It's just kind of like the setting for putting these characters in an interesting position. But I love a lot of the themes that we're getting out of what Rayencourt was bringing up. And then looking at Soul as a human instead of as a god. And that's what I think a lot of all four of us, the time period that we grew up in. I was talking to my wife about this earlier. We all kind of idolized Jedi and said, "Oh, these guys are the best thing for the galaxy. They're, they have the power. They're Superman almost in this universe." And the fall of the Jedi for us was all like a tragedy, but we never looked at them as fallible. I don't think humans. I think we were looking at them as they are force wielding gods in this
Mhm.
galaxy, in this universe. They can't be fallible. They can't, and that's what I think a lot of this pushback online is a lot of people saying, "Oh, well, that's not my Jedi. The Jedi are great. They're the good guys. The Sith are the bad guys. It's good and evil. There is no shades of gray. It has to be
Mhm.
this way."
Right. It's like
And
the cowboy with the white hat versus the cowboy with the black hat. Like if he's got a
Yeah.
black hat, he's the bad guy. Like it's like that. It's not that simple. All right.
Mhm.
And I
If
think
I
we've seen
may,
it.
if I may pull something from Schaff's shirt, Star Trek, it's what makes the Next Generation different from Deep Space Nine. Because in the original series and the Next Generation, the Federation is the good thing. It's wonderful. It's great. But then when you get to Deep Space Nine, you start to think, maybe the Federation isn't good for Bajor.
Mhm.
And isn't a good thing and isn't a great thing. And I love those kinds of stories that make me think and make me question things.
So
You have an episode, in season 6 where Cisco does everything he can to get the Romulans into the war, and he's doing it in wearing a Starfleet officer's uniform. And it's just those shades of gray. Those are the interesting stories to me. And to answer your question, Vactor, did it need to be set in the High Republic? Yes, because I love the High Republic and I want more stories in there.
I do too.
I think it
It's
did.
entirely selfish.
I think it should have. I mean, because there's only two eras within the Star Wars timeline that I'm interested in seeing, and that's the High Republic era because it's ripe for interesting. Well, let me count three. So Knights of the Old Republic, that's that would be interesting. The High Republic era, of course, which is that season of peace, and we're catching the tail end of it, right? So how it
Right.
goes from peace to
Evan, I have books for you if you'd
ultimate-
like me to recommend them.
I need you to send me a whole list, and I'll start.
I did videos. So we did videos.
All right, send them over. But where I'm going with this is the only other era that I'm interested in is that gap between the First Order and Return of the Jedi.
Yeah.
So that age of resistance, I guess, is what they call it. And so, there's a lot to unpack in there, and I think we're seeing that with Mando and Book of Boba Fett, and the Ahsoka series and all that kind of stuff. But so those are, I think, areas of storytelling that are really compelling. And then I said this on an old Fuse Film podcast, where the only other place I'd want to go, and I've said the same thing about Star Trek, and they finally did it with Discovery, is I want to go 1,000 years into the future,
Right.
where there's no canon that you could create that would infringe on anything that we've seen before, and you have a full canvas that you can play with. And I even came up with ideas like, how cool would it be to see the Mandalorian Empire in the future, back and they're kind of the peacekeeping force of the galaxy. The Jedi don't exist, and then you have invaders from an outside galaxy coming in, because the one thing about Star Wars is it's always intergalactic conflict. You've never seen external conflict. You have in the Legends with the Yushin Vong. Do something like that. There's so many things that you can do within Star Wars to really make it interesting. And last thing I want to mention, because we had some Star Trek comparisons going on that I love, is when you look at Star Wars storytelling right now, I feel like we're kind of in the infancy of where Star Trek was 15 years ago, meaning Star Trek started as a show in the 60s. It was a cult following, and then it became, and then the movies came out, and then you had the Next Generation. But it was always the series. It was always a TV show that really drove Star Trek. Then JJ comes along and says, well, hey, I want to try to do something blockbuster here. Very successful. Divided the fan base because some people didn't like the Kelvin timeline and the choices there. Now you have the Paramount Plus universe of stuff, which is really, really good, continuing the legacy of Star Trek being a series, but there's been some evolutions there. Star Wars has always been a blockbuster entertainment, a movie, and now it's trying to play in this TV land. And I don't think it's really found its true voice yet. And because nobody has really figured out what are the right stories to tell and what are the wrong stories to tell. And so there is a little bit of spaghetti at the wall going on, and or made for a perfect series. That to me is a great TV show concept. It would have sucked as a movie. Like you couldn't have Born Legacy or Born Identity a Star Wars movie. So anyway, I just to draw those comparisons between Star Trek and Star Wars, I feel like we're also in that the fandom divide. Star Trek went through this a couple of times, and so Star Wars is kind of having their first schism right now. And blame it on Disney, blame it on whoever you want, but it's happening on who owns Star Wars and what should Star Wars be.
Right. There was one more quote that I wanted to say from Rain Court that also, just like with the emotion line,
bring it back, bring us back, Justin.
He said, when you're looking up to heroes, you don't have to face what's right in front of you. And so that's, again, the hero worship and the idolization of the Jedi. I think we need to get past that and beyond that. And I thought Last Jedi did a great job about that, because it was saying the same thing about Luke Skywalker, like, don't necessarily idolize Luke Skywalker. He's a human, and he had 30 years in between these two movies. And there was so much backlash about people saying he shouldn't have changed. He should have been the same guy he was 30 years ago. And I liked Last Jedi. I'm a Last Jedi apologist. And I thought that Rian Johnson did specifically, he's kind of like Soul in a certain sense, where he's put in this position where it's like, okay, JJ handed him, Luke has been gone for 30 years. Why was he gone for 30 years? And she's just handing him the lightsaber, and what is he supposed to do from there? Like, how's he supposed to explain why weren't you in all the battles? Why weren't you fighting and helping us? So I thought Rian Johnson did the Soul maneuver and just killed everybody. Like that, he did what he had to do in that situation. But my point is, he made it so that Luke had an arc and had a growth. And even at the end of Last Jedi, I still think Luke accomplished everything. He became a legend. He became what everybody said he was in the galaxy. He saved everybody. Like, all of this stuff that we wanted, he did. And so I think that's a great idea in Star Wars. And we need to push past being stagnant, staying in the same place, telling the same stories over and over again. And what Kevin said, that's why I'm looking forward to this Rey movie, because it's the farthest in the future of any timeline we've seen. And
Dawn of the Jedi is furthest in the past.
Those are the two. Those are the two that I'm looking
on the other end of the spectrum. I'm so glad you brought up this heroes quote, because I saw a thing today. I think you may have sent it to me. It used that quote in relation to Vernestra. And because when I heard a year ago that Vernestra Rowe was going, like an older Vernestra Rowe was going to be in the Acolyte, I'm like, oh great, awesome! Like to see a character make the leap from the books to the live action was exciting to me, and a character that I was familiar with. But seeing her in these the first few episodes, I'm just like, I don't know. It's just like, I'm not a fan of the portrayal right now. And this finale solidified that. And I just was not a fan of the choices she made, and how duplicitous she was. Because not only did she throw Soul under the bus, calling him a rogue Jedi, and that this was all his fault, and and all this stuff, she then turns around and says to May, "Yeah, he was a hero. He did what he thought was best." So, where am I supposed to believe? Like
The
and-
thing-
So based on your High Republic knowledge, because I haven't
Mhm.
read any of the material or any of that,
Right.
does this version of Vernestra, does it jive with what you know about her up to this point? Like it
it
sounds
hasn't
like
for me.
it sounds like it
hasn't for
doesn't. It
me.
sounds like this is really a deviation from the
It feels
character.
like it. It
Okay.
feels like it. And and I haven't read the recent novel yet, the one that just came out last month. But going forward, reading these books, I'm going to be watching Vernestra with a closer eye.
So let me
Because-
ask this pointed question then. The version of Vernestra from the books, how do you think she would have handled this situation versus the way she was portrayed in the show?
Question. I feel like maybe she might have been on Soul's side a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
And because she was at one point she was a very young, because in the books she was a Jedi Knight at age 14. She's a prodigy, and she was trained by a great Jedi. She's had at least 2 Padawans that we know of. She had a Padawan in the High Republic, in the High Republic era. Imri Kantaros, who her ship that she goes around is named after. Lovely touch, love it. But she goes beyond being a Jedi Knight in the books and becomes a Wayfinder, which is like not solely focused on the way of the Order, but the way of the Force. And to me, this seemed to be more like her actions in this show and in this season seem to be more dictated by the needs of the Order and not so much the needs of the Force. And
Right.
so,
that would have been great to have an explanation of Pathfinders for people who are not familiar with the High Republic. And that's kind of what I meant by, does it justify being set in the High Republic? I feel like it's almost so close to Phantom Menace. It looks like the prequel era. I wish we had gotten the height of the High Republic, and maybe even in phase 1 of the High Republic,
in the middle, like after the High Republic books are set, but like so far removed from the prequels, because that's the thing, is the Jedi in this feel like the Jedi of the prequels. They feel bureaucratic. They feel like I mean, the Jedi did some shady things in the High Republic. I'm not saying they didn't. I mean, in phase 2, Yoda kept a big secret that could affect the Jedi in phase 2, which takes place, 350 years before the Phantom Menace. So they've Jedi are all about cover-ups. It's what they do.
Yeah. And I hope people don't come at this show, because there's been so many people, it breaks the lore, breaks the canon and all this stuff. But I hope they don't come at it and say, well, this breaks everything because Yoda hid this, and Yoda's a great guy. He's the best guy, and he would have never done that. Tim,
he's a great guy, the greatest Jedi you've ever seen.
Oh gosh! Oh boy!
He's a good fella. Good fella. Really good he is.
Tim just pointed out, like, there's been precedents for Yoda covering stuff up, not only in High Republic, but even
in the
Phantom
prequels,
Menace.
because he kept like in the Attack of the Clones, he kept like we're not going to tell the Senate that we can't use the Force anymore, or in the Clone Wars, no, we're not going to tell anybody that these clones were produced by Count Dooku, because everybody likes the clone troopers and we like them, so we're not going to tell anybody about that. So yeah, Yoda is shady. I mean, Yoda didn't tell Luke that Darth Vader was his father. So until he died,
really bad hombre. Bad hombre.
He's a bad guy. I think Luke Skywalker said it in the Last Jedi. The hubris of the Jedi is ultimately what was their downfall. And I think we got to again, the story taste and the Acolyte seems like there's a lot of really cool stuff in the High Republic material that really brings this out. I want more of that. I think there's a lot of really compelling storytelling around showing this sort of Titanic sinking ship. So
yeah, I love that stuff. Now, Shoff, I wanted to ask you this specifically because I was reading a Collider interview with Leslie Headland from March, and she was talking like the show was done at that point. So it's very interesting to go back, and I'll leave a link in the show notes to this article to go back to March before we had, we have seen anything. And she said this, which made me think of Shoff, because Shoff specifically told me he's an underdog fan. He said he loves rooting for underdogs. So this is what Leslie Headland had to say. I think Star Wars is really complicated, but one of the themes is usually underdog versus institutional threat. That's one aspect of it. And to me, in that particular era, the Jedi are not a threat. They're benevolent, balanced, well-intentioned, beautiful institution that has amassed an enormous amount of power. So the question becomes, is it right for an institution to have that much power? And I think sometimes people get a little caught up in the morality of, oh, the good people can use power and the bad people can't. It's more about who is allowed to amass power and who is allowed to use it for their own ends. And that ends up being that in
Where have I heard that before?
That ends up being Mother Anastasia, what she
I
says.
was going to say that was her line in the show. That's interesting.
Yeah.
So what'd you think, Shoff?
Well, like, do I agree?
As the underdog versus the institutional threat, do you like that idea? Or did you take that away from this as you were watching it? Were you thinking like underdog versus institutional?
I think that Leslie Headland said a lot of things about this show in interviews that remains to be seen, to be perfectly honest. The ways that she has described this show, I would not say, having seen all 8 episodes, I would not agree. To say that it's not what you're going to expect. Like, how many times did she say it's not, this show is not what you expect it to be? It's not going to be what you expect. How about all the telegraphed plot points that we all predicted from the get-go? The amount of like Chimere is the stranger, like all signs were pointing to it. Like, the only thing that was making us think that it couldn't be is the fact that it was so blatantly obvious. Like, we're like, oh, they're not going to do that. He's not going to be the Sith Lord. It would be too obvious. They're like, it's like right on the nose. He's like just winking and twirling his mustache at this point. Like, and then
to be fair, real quick, she did say that the mysteries that you thought were supposed to be the ones you're focusing on, we're going to answer those right away, so they're not. And I think that's what the Chimera thing was she was like, oh, that's not what you need to focus on. So she kind of covered herself in interviews by saying that. But yeah, I know what you're saying.
Or even Osha becoming the Acolyte when it was established from the beginning that it was most likely going to be May. Like, that I think was a plot point that we all pretty much predicted that it was going to happen. I think a few episodes back I said it. It was like there's not a lot that felt fresh, new ideas, something that really like surprised us. The only thing that really surprised me is the lightsaber battles were so good. Like, I did not expect to see such great choreography in a TV show, because what we have seen previously in Disney Star Wars TV is not remotely to this level.
This was Phantom Menace level duels.
Yeah, the discipline that must have happened, the amount of rehearsals, just incredible. And Manny Jacinto, especially when you see like some of the rehearsal footage of him practicing his lightsaber duels, like amazing. And you got to wonder, is he underneath the mask in those scenes? I would imagine so, because why else would he have these rehearsals, right? Like, he's doing all these rehearsals while he's wearing the mask. So that means that while he's practically wearing the mask, it's not like that's a CGI element, right? So he's wearing that in these scenes and doing all this stuff while wearing that. Like, that's impressive. So the lightsaber battles were my favorite aspect of the show. But do I think that Leslie Headland really knows the show that she had? No, I don't. I don't even think that this is what she intended it to be. I think it's a series of vignettes that somewhat worked and somewhat didn't, but I don't think that the story that she told is a complete story, nor do I think that she really focused on the important parts of the story.
It is strange that this show was announced May the 4th, 2020, and we ended up
it was a long time ago.
Later. Why I know COVID was in between there, but why that long? We didn't have to wait that long for any of the other shows. So it was Mando strange.
Season 2 that this was announced.
Yeah. Oh, and I want to say real quick, if we do get a season 2, I don't believe that it would be called The Acolyte. I believe that if we do get a season 2, it would be a world
The
builder.
Book of Chimere.
No, I think it would be more focused on the High Republic. I think we would get that B storyline would become the A storyline, and we could then flesh out the world a little bit more and not make it so focused on these twins, because that aspect is done. Like, we've established who the Acolyte is. Unless we want to follow through on more training on the Sith side, we still could do that and check in with her. But I also don't think that she's the focus anymore.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think in season 2, I think the story is the political climate and how that is allowing for the Sith darkness to brew more. And now that Chimere has his acolyte, now that we've gotten the 4-second tease of Plagueis, you can allow those things to cook as that B story, but it's a stronger B story while you have all these other things. And again, the stakes are higher as you are getting closer and closer to that Phantom Menace sort of apex sort of situation. So,
yeah, 100%. We are going to say goodbye to Super Tim, but before he goes, I wanted to get, Tim, your kind of the things that you loved about this episode, things that we hadn't seen before.
First off, I loved seeing a kyber crystal bleed on camera. When that happened, so cool. I'm like, oh my gosh, it's bleeding. Because that's not something we've only seen in the comics. And with Mr. Charles Soule.
That was one of 2 moments where I stood up out of my chair.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I'm like, it's happening. And not only do we see the kyber crystal bleed, but when she ignites the lightsaber, it's blue. I'm like, oh, is it going to stay blue? And then it turns red. I'm like, that's cool. Because it's something that I've not seen only in comics. And I know that I think it occurred in Jedi Survivor, the video.
It did.
Yes.
But I don't play video games. So I didn't get a chance to see that. Right. So it was just a huge thing for me. And the lightsaber battle, like some of the callbacks to Star Wars. I loved when Vernestra called Chimere a pupil of hers that turned to evil. That was a wonderful callback. It if you knew what it was, then you're like, oh, I see what you did there. But if you didn't, then it didn't detract at all. The lightsaber fights were great. The fight between Osha and May, hand-to-hand combat was wonderful.
That was great.
Well shot. Yeah,
it was really well shot.
Especially
it reminded me of
that
Civil
kick
War.
Into the lightsaber cross. I love that. That was a great really juxtaposition. Cool. Like the scene was a great transition. Yeah.
And I wrote down a list here, Tim. You almost went through all of them. Things we had not seen in live action before: bleeding a kyber crystal, the bearish vow, cortosis, just the High Republic in general, memory rubbing, which we've seen it in the Clone Wars animated show, and we've seen it in the Knights of the Old Republic video game. This was the first time we've seen it, like the Sith having that power to erase. Wire work fight scenes, that the whole show has had that. Mixing that Asian martial art in there. The Sith having an apprentice, like we hadn't seen.
We've kind of seen that in the Clone Wars because Dooku had Ventress.
Yes, right. That's the only time we've ever seen it where they've allowed their apprentice to have an apprentice. But also the Sith code, peace being a lie, that Chimere talks about. That was also the first time we've heard that mentioned.
Also, talk about that lightsaber fight when Chimere had his small second lightsaber. That reminded me of Ahsoka's small second lightsaber from the Clone Wars.
Right, and that's like
it's average sized, actually.
That's Jackie also.
Size doesn't matter, Tim.
There's true, a fighting style.
It's just how you use it.
Using but that was
mate.
That was great. Also, before you go, Tim, Darth Plagueis. That was another thing we've never seen before, and getting him in live action. That was the second.
Except he just came across as a nosy neighbor. He was just like he's like peeking through the blinds, like, oh, what are they doing? They didn't take out their trash.
Those kids are on my lawn again.
I had a friend text me, and he was like, why did he come across as a creeper? Like he's just like and when they get it on later, he's definitely watching them. He was like when they're peeking, when they're in the bedroom doing their Sith code, he's like they're Plagueis is definitely taking a peek.
He's doing a
So I
little
thought that
memory rubbing. You know what I'm
I
talking
thought
about?
that was
Right.
funny.
Good, some kind of rubbing.
Yes.
But
Bleeding out a crystal over there.
you know what I really liked about this episode is it actually ended.
Hmm.
And it has
This
the
was
iconic
actually
looking off
had an
into the
ending. Like,
distance
okay, this is a good
shot.
place to end it. Not like,
Yeah.
all right, it's over.
Right.
Real quick before
That-
you go,
that was
Tim, the Yoda cameo. What's your thoughts on that?
Fine with it. I'm surprised it took this long, actually.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
I actually thought it was going to happen much sooner. Because Yoda is there. He's very present in the High Republic. There
Yeah,
are
absolutely.
in the
I've,
mailroom.
stories.
I've watched the young Jedi Adventures with my son, so I know he's there hanging out.
Yes.
You know?
Yeah,
So,
like there are issues of the High Republic comic where he is very present. I mean, he's on the main cover of one of them.
Right.
So yeah, like I don't know. I didn't feel like it needed to be like the Nick Fury of this episode, but it's just
Jedi initiative, I tell you.
Yeah.
But I liked it. It was fine. It was like, all right, Yoda's like it was treated like it was this shocking thing. I'm like, but I already know Yoda's here. Like I already know that he's here because I've seen him so many times in the High Republic. So
Who is more creepy, the back of his head or Plagueis? I don't know.
who knows? Who knows?
The back
All
of
right,
Yoda's
Tim.
head is ridiculous.
Thank you very much for joining us, my friend, and giving us your High Republic insights. We always enjoy having you. We are going to be hearing from Super Tim again in the future as we cover more comics and High Republic stuff. Tim, thank you very much, my friend. We will see you on the next one.
May the force be with you.
Kevin, you had a specific thing that
Yeah.
you wanted us to talk about.
This show was a convoluted mess. It was all over the place. It not only broke canon multiple times, it interjected characters that didn't belong. Ki-Adi-Mundi wasn't supposed to be born yet, but that's not even the problem. Let's change his birth date. No problem. Let's put him in there. He now knows that this is no longer a time of peace, which is what his argument was in The Phantom Menace when Qui-Gon came before them with a Vergence in the Force, which we also have in this show. So Anakin is no longer the first Vergence in thousands of years. We have that here with these two children, not only one, but two. Somehow they created life and they were able to split it into two chosen ones, essentially. I mean, you ask me, like, what constitutes Anakin as the chosen one? He was created from the Force. Force created him, and they did that here with the two twins. That was supposed to be one person, and it now diverged into two. So you have two chosen ones. May that is constantly going back and forth. Then, oh, I'm going to train to avenge you. Now I'm good again. Oh, now I'm going to run away once I see the Jedi are trying to kill you on Brendok, and then I'm evil, and then I'm good, and then I'm evil. Soul, who's literally like canceled because he made the right decision to kill these witches that are obviously freaking evil, possesses one of their Padawans that they brought on the planet to investigate, starts disintegrating into black smoke and disintegrates the child into black smoke as well. In those moments, you don't have time to think and ask, what are you doing? Hey, what are you doing? No, you got to take out the target. And I wish it was great, man. I really do. I love when Star Wars is fun and good and upbeat.
All right. So that's our friend over there at the Star Wars Theory. And, I'll say respectful guy, and he has his opinions. And some of that I think we already touched on. I think Saul was in the right in the moment. I think the circumstances that drove to that moment could have been avoided. But and we beat that one to death. But I want to go to what he talked about earlier. This guy has been beating the drum about the canon issues that the Acolyte has presented, specifically Ki-Adi-Mundi and his birth year and how that has changed because of his addition into the show. And then the Vergence and the Chosen One and the salting of Anakin the Chosen. So I'm going to attack both of these in less than 2 minutes. So the first part, Shoff is like, he can't do shit in 2 minutes.
I can't wait.
So
I can't wait.
So anyway, the first thing is the Ki-Adi-Mundi. Go watch Screen Crush's video on this because it'll explain it way better than I can. But essentially, the original birth date of this character was based off of like a DVD extra that existed on the Phantom Menace DVD copy that, as far as I didn't exist. I didn't even know it existed until the Screen Crush told me. And so that right there tells me that everything about Ki-Adi-Mundi birth date is up for grabs. So now we have a canon show, which we know everything that is the quote Disney canon is real, and anything that's, and this guy actually, Star Wars Theory, has a great video where he talks about the George canon, all the different tiers and things like that. And I think it was Screen Crush that talked about it too.
Mhm.
So like, to me, I'm fine with it. There's no canon break here, and just get over it. You just don't like that they made a decision to erase something that 5 people knew existed for a
And nobody
character.
cared.
And nobody cares. It's freaking Ki-Adi-Mundi. Like, he's a worthless character. I'm sorry, Star Wars fans. Like, he's Jar Jar to me. Like, that's the level I put him in. So, all right. Talked about that one. Now let's talk about the Virgins.
Check.
I mentioned this earlier, I think, in the top of the show, and I'll say it again. There is a distinct difference between a Virgins in the location and a Virgins around a person. Anakin was a immaculate conception Virgins birth. Okay. Meaning the midi-chlorians created him out of nothing, and therefore, and he's so powerful. He's his own Virgins. What we saw in this show does not salt that, in my opinion. Number one, what Mother Anastasia did was basically force magic combined with force science. So it's essentially like in vitro force birthing. All right, it's Star Wars IVF, and so that to me, I think, is way different than an immaculate conception, because a person is involved in creating this life and leveraging the Force to do it. The Force didn't do it itself and make it all happen. Somebody used the Force as a way to do it. Those are two very different things. And then on top of that, like I said earlier, the Virgins is not the twins, which, by the way, it's established now that they're not twins. They're the same person, just split in two. And so
I did want to ask you guys about that in a second with the twins thing.
I have a thought on that
So
one.
so that's my response to at Star Wars Theory. I will never pretend to know more about Star Wars than that guy. And Justin and you and I were texting about this, earlier today, and I'll keep this light. To me, this guy and others like him in the Star Wars fandom, not to get on this tangent about the division stuff, but like, it's almost kind of like the political divide in our country. Like, there's the people that want to debate healthily and argue healthily and are okay that we disagree. But this guy is starting to kind of become a fringe voice simply because we're allowing him to, and simply because he's incentivized to do it. And so, like, nothing he says holds water to me anymore like it used to. And I think these are the type of people that honestly we shouldn't celebrate, and we should start rejecting, because they're bad for the fandom. They're bad for Star Wars. And I think when they start putting this crap out here about, it's not canon and stuff like that. First off, general audiences like my dad don't give a hoot. And by the way, my dad is as conservative as anybody could be. He actually really liked the Acolyte. Didn't mind any of like the quote unquote woke stuff or whatever, any of those other things that have been brought up. So it's like, I think when you poll the average audiences, the 70% that are like in the middle, like, I think they look at this as, well, it's an interesting show. There's things I like. There's things I didn't like. All the stuff we just talked about up to this point in this podcast. So anyway, that's my response to this clown. But again, and I shouldn't say that. I need to be respectful. He's not a clown. He's doing his job. He's incentivized to do what he's doing. And, but go back to selling lightsabers and, that's all I got to say.
Well, and in our group chat for our texting back and forth, like Vactor had shared a tweet of Star Wars Theory where he said, or maybe the show is just shit, you intolerable shill. Like, as you were saying, like he has now become a ringleader of that toxic fandom. Yeah. And this word shill, I wanted to get into briefly
Please.
because I've never heard it used more than in discussions surrounding this show or social media posts or YouTube videos in the comments section. If you are a content creator and you demonstrate or, indicate that you like this show or any aspect of this show, you are immediately labeled. They go straight to it. For whatever reason, this is like the gold standard of insults now, and the vernacular of this toxic fandom, but you are referred to as a shill. And it is so interesting to me that is like the big insult is that you must be getting paid by Disney in order to say nice things about this show. That we as people can't just find nice things about everything in life. Like, sure, there are aspects of the show that suck. And when they do suck, we talk about them. But we also balance it out because not everything about the show sucked. But the moment there's a short that is shared that we say something kind or complimentary about the show or the writers or the acting or whatever, we're shills. And I cannot tell you how annoying that is to witness in the comment section. And it is very unproductive. And it's completely laughable because we're not making an effing dime from Disney. And I would love to, personally. I would love if I was on Disney's payroll making money.
Well, all those people who are calling you shills, they would do the same thing. They would quit their jobs to make money from Disney.
And even if I was paid by Disney, I would still present a balanced perspective and review of the material presented in front of me. I'm not going to just speak inauthentically about something. If it's put in front of me to review it, I'm going to be honest and true and fair. And that's what I would hope anybody would be. So this whole show thing really irritates me.
Well, what's laughable to me about the shield thing is I feel like that is a generational thing as well, because you remember when we were growing up, selling out was terrible. Like, you're a sellout. Oh, that guy, he sucks. I think today's audience, today's content creators, that is celebrated. Oh, you're getting paid. You got sponsors. Like, that's something that in the TikTok era, in the Instagram era, these kids today, they don't see it as selling out is a bad thing. Selling out is the goal. You want to be so popular that brands want to work with you, that you want to make money. So I think that it's funny to say that shill is
I actually have firsthand experience with this. So most people who don't know my backstory, I used to own a site called fusefilm.com, and we were back in the 2007, 2008 era, we were a tier 2 blog site, not quite the level of Ain't It Cool News and the Slash Films and Screen Rants of the world, but we were kind of right there, right below. And I'm getting hit up by Paramount. I'm getting hit up by USA Network, Disney. Everybody in the world is saying, hey, we have stuff. We want to send it to you, whether it's free DVDs, toys. We want to set up an interview with so-and-so for whatever. Some of the best moments of my life, I can honestly tell you as an influencer during that era, was getting to leverage those relationships with the studio to be able to sit across the table from Natalie Portman, to be part of part of the infancy of the Marvel Cinematic Universe and stuff like that. And like, as somebody who never made a dime from any of that, they didn't pay me to do it. I just had traffic that was valuable to them, and I had an audience that was valuable to them, and I leveraged that to get access. But I was never compromised in my storytelling, in my reviews. If something wasn't good, we would talk about it. And did Disney once say, hey, we're not going to send you stuff anymore because you crapped on our, movie or whatever? No. And so, just for people out there who don't understand how this actually works, Disney doesn't care if you give a bad review or a good review, because if anybody who truly understands marketing is all about impressions, and it's all about reach, and it's all about engagement, whether it's positive or negative, as long as it's not offensive and it's not racist or any of those things, then Disney accepts it because it's the old adage, whether it's good PR or bad PR, it helps enhance that. It's free marketing. Like outside of college football and some sports teams, what other things exist in life like Star Wars and Star Trek where people pay to market that property themselves? Think about that for a minute. You got to go buy a $25 t-shirt that says Star Wars on it, and you're giving Disney free marketing. They don't have to pay for that advertising.
Right.
So it's like the to me the concept of a shill doesn't exist. We're all shills, really, if you really want to take the word, because we're all buying the merchandise, we're using it, we love it and stuff like that, and we're out there marketing it freely for Disney. So it's like,
Right.
if you don't if you don't believe that's true, then you're just nuts. Like you're just living in a fantasy world. So,
Yeah.
but that's my firsthand experience, I guess, of being a shill, but not being one. So
That's
yeah.
awesome. I was
Yeah.
thinking, like, when you look back at comments, like before people were calling us shills, like the most common insult that like a toxic fandom, person is going to go for, like either your sexual orientation
Oh gosh.
or like, I mean, that's why I say, like, if I had to put it in like simplest form, I would say yesterday's cuck is today's shill. Like,
Mm.
and it's really weird that we're in this zone. It makes me wonder what the next like derogatory term or word that becomes derogatory will be. Because it's certainly not okay at this point to provide just a balanced, perspective of a show and, and have valid opinions or authentic,
Right.
point of views on things. Like you can't say nice things.
So I just
without-
recently watched a YouTube video this morning, actually. It was Jon Stewart and Bill O'Reilly, two men like on opposite sides of the spectrum that were sitting at a table, and they were jabbing at each other hilariously, and having just a really good time and having healthy debate. I want to read something that they said, that hatred today exists. It has always been around, but it exists more macroscopically around social media, because social media, this hatred is incentivized and monetized. So what do you do about this? They both agreed: reject it and don't celebrate it. We should have the ability to argue with each other in good faith. Good faith. Allow ourselves to be passionate and defend our positions, but argue with each other in good faith. And then the last thing they talked about, and agreed on, is that we shouldn't want anybody to be destroyed or hurt. And whether that's physically, right? And whether that's verbally. And, words, I know sticks and stones break my bones. Words can never hurt me. That's bullcrap. Words hurt immensely. And so I take the shill comments very, very like sensitively, because it's, to me, it's offensive. And because I just love the fact that I get to spend an hour and 45 minutes or 2 hours or an hour or whatever it is talking Star Wars with friends. Like
Yeah.
that to me is not being a shill. That to me is having community. That to me is more important. So anyway, I just thought I'd share that like, whether it's political divide, whether it's Star Wars fandom divide, or whatever it is, like arguing is okay, but it needs to be done, and there needs to be good faith, and there needs to be nobody should get hurt in the process.
Yeah.
That's not what this
And
country
it's-
was founded on. That's not what free speech is. That's not what responsible free speech is.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Good point.
It is crazy that it's around Star Wars for the most part, because Shuff and
Mhm.
I did a Star Trek podcast, and we never got the shield comments when we liked a show. If we liked Picard or we didn't like Picard, if we didn't like a movie or we did like a movie, we never got those comments. I think back to like when I would play Xbox and PlayStation, and all right, the Sony guys are like, "Oh, you're an Xbox shill because you liked a Microsoft game." So I think sometimes there's like the tribal nature of,
Mhm.
oh, you like the opposite of, or the competition. Let me put it that way, because same thing with Marvel and DC. Sometimes with comic books, I'll be reading DC comics, and I'll have somebody who is a Marvel zombie and say, "Oh, you're a DC guy." Like and it's like it's an insult, but it's like, wait a minute. I'm just enjoying these different companies' products. I like all of them. There's not one company that I don't like. And that's the same thing with Star Wars. It's like I like Star Trek, I like Star Wars, I like Battlestar Galactica. These are all things that I like and enjoy. So why is it you're we are getting these specifically with these Star Wars projects? I think it's a lot of the Star Wars theory audience, like a lot of the type of people who are enjoying Star Wars theory content, they're grouping together and forming this hive mind. And those are the people who are doing the review bombing. Like even before the show came out, the trailer is the most disliked thing on YouTube. And I think that is a small set of people who have grouped together, found their tribe, and they're enjoying that community. But you have to look at it. Are you hurting someone else? Like your grouping together, is that a positive thing for other people? If it's not, then why are you there? Like what fulfillment do you get out of causing someone else discomfort? I don't understand.
And the good news is like I don't think corporately like Disney is supporting him, or like he's, at least we don't know. Like I don't see he's getting, like when we see our friend Rob Keyes getting Acolyte swag in the mail and posting about it, or the Star Wars Explained people getting the same kind of stuff. Like I don't see him getting any of that stuff. So like that's the one good thing I'll say is like he's not corporately like incentivized.
Well, I actually did see him not get invited to a roundtable with Leslie Headland, with Dave Filoni, and him being upset and being like, I have 3 million subscribers. Why was I not invited? And it's like, well,
because you're just going to go there and start crap with all these people and like be disrespectful, and that, like, who wants to see that? Again, because you choose not to debate healthily and in good faith. You know, so
and that's what
and you spread your fake news, you know, around what's canon and what's not canon and all this kind of stuff. So
and that's just to get clicks, just to feed the trolls, feed the audience, but that's not what we want to do here. So I love that we can have this type of conversation and we can say things that we like and don't like about the show. Not all of us think this is the greatest show. You know, I don't think any of us think it's the greatest show. We all like Andor more than this, but it's a bigger problem with Disney Star Wars overall, where people are just, it's building and building and building, where each show, because I didn't see it as much as this for Ahsoka as I am seeing for this, and I didn't see it on Book of Boba Fett and Mando. Like I feel like it's building each show. More and more of these people are like, it's too woke, it's too this and that, and it's all under this Disney banner. So I'm hoping that moving forward, Kevin, Disney is not taking, you know, this into account. They're only looking at, hey, what are the streaming numbers? What are the merchandise numbers for the theme parks? People buying the shirts.
We talked about this over the phone, and you know, so again, this is my marketing background coming out when we were asking, you know, is this going to get a season 2? Based purely on content and story, no. But what we don't know is the back end stuff, right? So again, like I look at everything from a business perspective. What is the return on investment? I spent $180 million on this show. If I'm Disney shareholders, did that drive 2x, 5x, 10x of value to Disney? And you can look at that in so many different ways, right? Like, did Disney Plus subscribers go up during the Acolyte run for the last 8 weeks? If they did, that's one key metric. Okay. Other things. Okay. Of those subscribers, how many of them engaged not only in the Acolyte and stuck with it, but then also other content? And then then how does that expand into the outside stuff? Merchandising, sales, lunch boxes, you know, water bottles, toys, all of those kind of things. But then also allowed for other things to, we call it in the business world incrementality. Where is that incrementality? And how are they measuring all of that? That's what I would be very interested in knowing how they measure that. And again, does it ultimately generate a 2x, 5x, 10x return on investment? Because when in the theater world, it was always easy to see that. Okay, it was a budget of $180 million and it made $1 billion in like the first month. That's like I can't do the math in my head, but that's like a like a 5x, ROI or whatever. Like any financial investor would take that like tenfold. So we don't know the measurement that's going on in the back end from a business perspective. So to be interested to see, is that there to warrant a second season from a financial return on investment perspective?
Actually,
or will they say, hey, we want to do this, but we're going to have to approach this differently. You're going to have to use the volume. We're going to have to do it on a $50 million budget or whatever, or $25 million budget. And then what story can we approach season 2 that allow us to do that?
And don't take 4 years to put out season 2. Shuff, that's a good question. Do you want a season 2? Do you want to know more, or are you okay with this at where it ended?
I wouldn't mind a season 2 if it focused more on the High Republic infrastructure, culture, less focused on Osha and May. In fact, I would be okay if I never saw them again, to be perfectly honest. I don't care about that storyline. Now that Osha is aligned with Chimera, I feel like if we're going to see anybody, we're going to see more of Osha. I feel like May could fade into the background fairly easily, because really that story is more about Vernestra at this point and her ties to Chimera. So I feel like May is sort of having her mind wiped. I feel like she's kind of a non-issue at this point. But like, do I really want a season 2? I could go either way. I'd be okay with it, but I also don't need it. I'll tell you what though. I'm a big Lego fan. I love Lego. I collect, if you can see behind me, let's go this way. There's a ton of Lego sets there, and there's a bunch that you can't see that are like all the way over here. But anyways, the point I want to make is I think you can judge how successful a Star Wars property is based on if Lego has made sets for it. And when you look back at the previous Disney Plus Star Wars shows, there have been Lego sets for Mandalorian. There have been Lego sets for Book of Boba Fett. There have been Lego sets for Ahsoka. There's even a Lego set out or will be out for Skeleton Crew, and that show hasn't even come out yet. There's
Super
Lego
pumped about it.
Yeah, there's Lego sets for the Young Jedi Adventures, right? And then all the Clone Wars sets, all the Rebels sets. I mean, there has been Lego and Star Wars, they have a marriage that is probably unseen elsewhere as far as like a merchandising licensing agreement that they've got, right? Like, so, but is there an Acolyte set? There is not a single Acolyte set in existence. There are no minifigures. There are no sets. And that is really weird.
That is very weird.
With the stranger's helmet, that would be a perfect minifig.
Yeah.
I want that minifig.
I was really expecting them to at least have like the ship that they fly, that the Jedis are using, that like, separates into two. Like, I think that would have been a great set. You could have easily done like a locale based set, something that's smaller, like more of like a play set on either of the planets. Brendok was featured so heavily, like then, like you could have had it at the base, had some night, like there's so many places that they could have used. They could have had the Bunta tree as like a set, right? Like that would have been fun. But they didn't. And that tells me that even like Disney Star Wars did not invest in conceptually the ways that they could market this outside of the show, which means that they didn't believe in it either.
I think the marketing has been like really mundane. Like I almost forgot it was coming out, like even as it was leading up. And then I remember I started seeing ads again for it, but like it wasn't marketed the way that I've seen it, like Mandalorian marketed and things like that. And again, it's probably like they probably couldn't figure out how to market it, right? Because there's no like mainstream actor, even Carrie-Anne Moss, like unless she's not a mainstream actor or actress, whatever. And like, so there wasn't somebody you could do there. And then it was just kind of like, like Skeleton Crew has Jude Law. Like that you have a big name there. Mandalorian, I mean, once you saw Baby Yoda, it was kind of like that. You can just market Baby Yoda every day.
Yeah.
So it's like there wasn't really anything there. I know we're trying to wrap up, and I have a couple of questions for the crew here, really quick.
Yeah.
I like categories. I'm a big category guy, so I have a couple of categories I'm gonna throw at you guys. Who gets the overacting award for this series? And then, like, what is the like, who won the movie? That's my next category. And then, if we could recast one character, who would you recast it with? So I want to answer these, but I want you guys to answer them first, and then I'll circle back.
Okay.
So start with the overacting award.
I'm gonna go with Padawan Mog.
Yeah.
I'm gonna go
think like Mark Ruffalo in Zodiac or something like that kind of overacting that we're getting, or what was it? What was the Priest movie that he was in? He was the reporter, Flashlight or whatever it's called. I don't remember.
Oh, I don't know.
About the Boston Globe sort of scandal. Anyway.
Yeah, I know what you're talking about.
It doesn't matter, but just that kind of overacting that you get,
I don't think there was one that was too blatant. I want to say Yord, just because
Charlie Barnett.
That might have been the writing too, but there wasn't anyone that specifically stuck out to me. But I also want to call out Basil and his sniffing all around, and then his drop kick. I don't know what the point of Basil was.
So that was actually my overacting award was Basil.
Oh,
I couldn't.
Okay.
I couldn't figure that character out to save my life.
Do you know that I had a feeling you were going to say Basil? It's so funny that I was like, I think he's going to say
Basil. Twins.
Well,
Basil. But why
was he not being helpful to Soul? Why was he?
Why did he stop the ship? None of that made sense to me.
Yeah. Not a clue. Especially he knew at this point that this was May and not Osha.
Yes,
right. What the very person he was trying to find.
Remember they had that scene with the oil spit in her face and he drop kicked her. It was and he's running at her so why did he then stop Soul from pursuing her? My mom asked me that question today. She was like, why did he sabotage the ship? And I was like, I don't know, Mom. That's the worst question I can't answer.
Worst use of a space hamster I've ever seen, or whatever.
Great. The animatronic, the puppetry looks great, but his character was why was he in there? If you had removed him from it, and let's say replace the sniffing with just use the Force.
Yeah, I don't know.
Find
the Force.
Find it with the Force. That would have been better.
It bugs me so much. The whole concept of the character, everything about Basil, just freaks me out. And I don't know why.
That was a wasted opportunity. What was your second question?
So the second question was, who won the movie?
Oh, yes.
And then the third one was going to be, if you could recast one character, who would it be?
Okay. Shuff, who won the movie?
I think Soul. Ooh. It was either going to be Soul or Chimere, I think, is going to be the winner of the movie. But I got to give it to Soul because I think he had more heart. I think he's the heart of the movie or of the show. I mean, so
yeah, I said movie too. I meant series.
Yeah.
So
I think it's Soul.
I'm going Chimere. I think Manny Jacinto just dominated every
Jacinto for me.
Yeah,
because I think for me, using Soul over Chimere, because I honestly, Manny was amazing, impressive, and it's a pretty close call for me. But I think it's the aspect that, and I don't know Soul's actor's name off the top of my head. I can't.
Lee Jung Jae.
Thank you.
They call him JJ.
He learned English for this, That's 4 months of an English intensive to play this character, and he gave one of the most convincing human performances. And at no point was the English, hard to understand. It came across very earnest. He understood what he was saying. It wasn't just that he was reciting lines. He understood what they meant. And he was providing an emotional sort of grounding to all of it. And I think that is really impressive. So that's why I'm choosing Soul, because there was a lot of additional prep that went into that, just on Manny's side all of the additional rehearsals related to the lightsaber training and stuff that went into it too. So
What I think is crazy is I don't think Amanda Stenberg did a bad job, but compared to Lee Jung Jae and Manny Jacinto, they blew her out of the water in terms of acting and the nuance on their face, the range of in both characters. Soul, it was like, okay, the um the established teacher, he's in control, everything. And then like the renegade, like emotions out of control, like he's losing it. Those two different aspects were amazing that he played those two. And then for Manny Jacinto to play the bumbling oaf character in Chimera, and then to play the calm, reserved stranger, where he like pretty much never lost his cool. He was even the entire time. That's what I think you should have had with May and Osha. You should have had two completely different performances. And I don't think the writing helped Amanda Stenberg, but also her. I think she might just be too young in her career
So
because
she's my number 3. She's the one I would recast and the character I would recast because the show doesn't work without a really strong performance there, and I feel like maybe that whole concept would have been so much better had you had a better actress. Unfortunately, and not saying she's a bad actress. I think maybe she just wasn't best for the part. And again, like if you ask me who I would recast for that, to be honest with you, I don't know. Because I'd want to keep the diversity there, so I definitely want to have an African American actress in that role.
I wonder if Moses Ingram from Obi-Wan. I wonder if she in this role what she would have done.
She could have been interesting. I had thought about her.
What about the chick from The Bear?
I don't know.
Oh yeah,
I know the show, but I don't know.
Yeah,
I don't know the reference there.
She played April O'Neil in Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles: Mutant Mayhem.
She's too big, but I like what an interesting casting would have been somebody like Zendaya. Like,
I thought you were going to say Lizzo.
where you have
you said she was too big.
No, not physically, but like in terms of just like her stardom, I guess, and probably her fees. But like a Zendaya would be interesting. You know, she's really compelling on that show Euphoria. And stuff like that. She has a huge following, so I think it would have brought like it kind of would have been like the Taylor Swift effect in the sense of you would have gotten a lot of just Zendaya fans that would have flocked to the Acolyte to see her do that. I think honestly the show needed something like that, needed a casting like that. Carrie-Anne Moss was, I remember when they announced the Acolyte and it was like Carrie-Anne Moss is joining this dark side Star Wars series, and I was like, oh, that's kind of cool. Trinity, like. And I thought that was the biggest name that the show had. And I'm thinking $180 million, you couldn't have gotten somebody like, I mean, Andor had Stellan Skarsgård, all these like great character actors. Like, what are we doing here? So yeah, I think the show needed a better, stronger lead, unfortunately.
So, originally I was thinking the May and Osha, like her performance not being different enough was a hindrance. But then the more I thought about it, and now that we know she's supposed to be the same person, maybe that was intentional. I don't know. Maybe it was accidentally intentional that she's playing them so close together. It works because they're the same person. But then that leads me to, this is the question I was wanting to get in with you earlier, Shaw. The twins aspect of this being marketed as they're twins and the Acolyte being the O and all of these things. What was the point of them being twins? Like what does that mean overall in the Star Wars universe? We know now that there was one person that got split into two. Well, what does that mean? What are the ramifications of that in the overall Star Wars universe? We didn't see it in this show because I thought as it was going on, I was like, I had these theories of, and I think we talked about it. All three of us talked about like, what if she was a forced projection? What if she was like, all these theories tied into her being just one person. And that was the nursery rhyme of I am with you, you are with me, always one, whatever that whole thing was.
Yeah.
So I thought that was going to mean something. I thought, oh, okay, one is her dark side, one is her good
Right.
side, or
I
what is
was
her
actually thinking,
anger?
I was thinking Star Wars Fight Club, honestly. Like that would have actually been even more compelling if like the whole thing at the
Was in her
very end
mind.
was, yeah, it was kind of like the twist in Fight Club,
Yeah.
like that would have been
Yeah.
more compelling to me.
Yeah.
Um,
I honestly half expected that they were going to merge by the end of the
Yes, I also thought
that would
season.
have been really weird to
Right.
see too. Yeah. Like a
That they're
merging.
the energies like being back on Brendock, that they just like are, fuse back together and become
Mhm.
one entity. But the other thing is they don't explain is why they were split into two to begin with. Like, what is the benefit there? They
Right.
talk about the power of two, but they don't say what that does. Like, what is the
Right. They
purpose
should
of
have.
that?
Yeah, they should have gone
Um,
into that. Mhm.
But to answer Kevin's third question, and also to answer yours, Vactor, who would I recast? Well, first of all, if you're going to have younger versions of the twins, even if they're not really twins, they're the exact same person, right? So it's not even a situation of twins where they're identical. They are the same person. So if I'm gonna recast somebody, I'm gonna recast one of the fucking kids to be the same.
Mm.
They cast two different kids who are literally, twin sisters in real life, but they are not identical sisters. They are fraternal sisters.
That's right. That's right.
And there was no logic behind that, because then in the future, when you see them 16 years later, grown up, they are played by the same female actress and look exactly the same and are identical. And then we find out later that they are in fact the same person, not even twins. So that further muddies the logic behind casting somebody else other than the same kid. They should have just done what they did before, which is they had Amandla play both parts. They would either have to have a kid play both parts as a kid, or because of labor laws, they probably can't do that. So they have to then find an identical set of kids to do this. They did it
Just
on Full
Lindsay
House.
Lohan.
They've done it
Parent
plenty of
Trap.
times before. Like, it is so weird to me that they did this. And honestly, knowing what I know now after episode 8 or episode 7 and 8 and finding out like the truth behind them, it makes it make even less sense. So who would I recast? I would recast the kids so that they were the same person. And then if I had a little bit more room in the budget, I would recast Indara, because there is no reason to have star power in that part, playing somebody who almost has no screen time. Carrie Ann Moss was wasted on this show.
100%. Like
I disagree on that. I loved her performance, doing the wire work, doing the martial arts, the fighting. I loved all of those things. I agree. I wish
I would have put her as
more of
Vernestra. Honestly,
Ooh.
I would have made her Vernestra.
I really see. We have to wait until the High Republic books finish. If they end up not giving us a reason why she's different in this show than she is in the books, then I'll say we should have recast Vernestra.
Well,
But
I have an answer to that, or at least a theory. I think it has to do with Chimere and the stranger character. I think that's going to be whatever happened.
That's what makes her
is what transforms her from whatever version you guys have in the books to what we got in the Acolyte. It's very clear to me that there was an effect there, because when she was on Brendock at the end and was kind of doing the Force visions and all that, she felt his presence immediately getting off that ship. He felt hers. There's a connection there. We know the light whip on his back. I mean, that's very obvious from her thing. And so I think that's the story. I want to see that story. I want to hear that story, and I want to read that story, whatever that is. So anyway, sorry.
See, the reason that it threw me off is Ahsoka and Rosario Dawson. We talked about this on the Fuse Film podcast, Kevin. Rosario Dawson. Oh, and Shoff, I think we talked about it too.
We talked about it too. Yeah.
Her being stoic and not like she was in the Clone Wars. There was no reason for that. Like, I thought by the end of the show, we were going to get a reason for why she was the way she was. And I just think it was a direction and writing thing. Or like an acting choice of Rosario Dawson. I'm going to play it like this. And that's the way that I'm going to do it. So I almost felt like Vernestra could be a similar situation. But if, like Kevin, if they do say that Chimere was the reason, then I will say, okay, yeah, that was fine. Recast Basil, put a different little person in there. That's my
Basil. What a weird.
answer.
I just can't get over it.
But
All right, one last category because I this one's funny.
yeah, he
I'm
loves his categories.
I'm stealing this from one of my favorite podcasts, The Rewatchables. Is
Oh.
the show better if you cast Danny Trejo, Steve Buscemi, or Michael K. Williams?
Yes.
I think
Yes.
100%. I think
Yeah.
I think you could replace Basil with like Danny Trejo. Like how awesome would that be?
He was in
or-
Book of Boba Fett. Yeah.
Yeah.
Machete just sniffing around.
Yeah. Perfect.
Michael K. Williams,
Man.
you make him the Ravencroft or whatever that senator's name
Yeah.
is.
Yeah.
Yes.
So
I could see that. One thing we didn't cover before we close out here was, and I put this on Threads, which anyone who wants a positive social media experience with Star Wars, go to Threads. I have been having a great time over there. Like it's 90% positivity and 10% toxic negative things. I rarely get it on Threads. So anyways, on Threads, we got to give a shout out to Michael Abels for his music because
Yes.
throughout the show, I think he's just been
Yes.
a solid, like there's never been a time where the music interfered or made me feel a way I shouldn't have felt. Like I just felt he did a solid job from start to finish. He did all the Jordan Peele movies and brought that kind of foreboding sense
Okay.
in the background. So I really liked his music. So I wanted to give him a shout out. And then all the things we talked about that we had never seen before in live action. I really liked the martial arts, having the wire work and bringing that Asian sense and mentality to it was something that we had never seen before. So that's what I wanted out of this show was seeing the High Republic, seeing things we had never seen before. And then overall, the concepts were things that I just really enjoyed talking to you all about and week to week having these water cooler conversations. So that's what, at the end of the day, I really did like the Acolyte. The themes and the ideas of the Acolyte to me trump having member berries and callbacks, which I felt like Obi-Wan was kind of like that, where it was like, remember Anakin, remember Obi-Wan, remember that. But then what was the point of that story of Obi-Wan? We already, like, it didn't add anything new to the mythos or to the lore. The only thing it added for me was that scene where Darth Vader grabs the ship out of the air with the Force. That was a cool moment. But overall, like, what was the point of now I'm blanking on his name, the comedian who I like a lot.
Kumail?
He was in Kumail Nanjiani. Why was he in Obi-Wan? What was the point of that Ice Cube's son?
That's the Carrie-Anne Moss of that show. Like just another wasted casting, very silly. So Ice Cube's son, whatever, he was in there. Like, what are we doing? Yeah.
What was the point of that? Like, there was no point to the cat. Like, that was almost like to get buzz of cat. Hey, guess who's in this? This casting announcement. And then Shaw, the thing that you said about Leslie Headland coming out and saying things about the show. One of the things I don't think she ever fulfilled the promise to me was not only this being a High Republic show in name only, basically. Like, it wasn't, to me, felt like we were in the thick of the High Republic and it looked different enough. Like, there was these little gold accents and they had white robes, but other than that, it looked like a prequel show. That, and then this is going to be told from a Sith perspective. Like, this is going to be looking at the Sith. The only mention of the Sith is Chimera saying, yeah, you might call me a Sith, maybe. And then we saw Darth Plagueis at the very end. So for her to say, this is going to look at the Sith and you're going to get from a Sith point of view, I don't think that was accomplished overall. Like, our stuff was looking at the Jedi as an institution, all those things, and questioning them. They're not all good. They're not all bad. They're not all good. They have shades of gray, but it's not from a Sith perspective. It's not from a Sith point of view. Maybe they'll go into that in season 2 if we get one, but season 1 was not an exploration of the Sith from top to bottom. There was just sprinklings of it. So that was, to me, that was just a little disappointing.
Also, the aspect of killing a Jedi without a weapon.
Oh yes, that was
Just
another thing.
All that was just using the Force. Like that's what they meant. Was just well, I'm not going to use a weapon. I'm just going to Force choke you. Like
yeah.
That to me, that is so dumb. Like, because if you're using the Force as a weapon, doesn't that make it a weapon? Like,
well, that to me doesn't bother me as much because they did it with the knives, like that was a weapon. They did it with the poison, that was a weapon, and she was still doing that all the way through Kelnaka. She didn't even kill him.
I just think it was a dumb criteria piece to becoming an acolyte. That like. You have to kill a Jedi without.
Yeah,
I thought it was going to be more figurative that you're dismantling the infrastructure of what the Jedi represent.
Right.
Not
that's
that.
Yeah,
this literal interpretation.
Yeah, that's the thing that because we talked about this on a previous podcast. Why that test? There was nothing in the Sith code about that. There was nothing to say, okay, if you do this, that means you are strong enough to become the apprentice. That means you have these qualities. They should have said something. They should have given us a reason. Now it's kind of like ambiguous, and you can come up with your own, oh, that's why they needed that test. But to say it out loud, for him to say you have to do it without a weapon, I don't think it ever fulfilled that.
Yeah, to me it seems like an achievement in a video game that like, okay, now you get to face off against this boss, but if you can do it without a weapon, we'll give you a special PS trophy. You'll get a rare 100%. Platinum one. Like, it's just like, it's dumb. It's dumb. The last thing I wanted to say about the show is from tragic characters. Like there's a fair amount of tragic characters on the show, but I think
100%.
The most tragic character
all of them, now that I think about it,
is Kelnaka.
Yes,
because
100%.
When you look at like what he got to do, first of all, you go back to the flashback and you see like he's very gentle, hardworking, always like, very like handy individual working on like various equipment, things like that. Very focused. He's the cook. Like he's very like hands-on, very much a team player. Doesn't make a fuss. Doesn't whine or complain or bitch like Torben or anything like that. He gets overtaken by Night Sister like magic and is possessed. So he's not even of his own mind. He's being possessed this time and forced to face off against his friends. He leaves Torben with massive scars on his face that he himself inflicted. He then is clearly disturbed because that we don't see him. We find out that he's gone off and basically is now living in solitude on like in like a ship that has like the nature has like overgrown all around it, right? And he's living by himself. You can see all the Night Sister magic like spiral insignias that he's drawn like on the ship, that clearly he can't get these symbols out of his head, which means that the Night Sister magic has pretty much fucked him up for these past 16 years. So he's not been of like the right mind ever since. And then he's been living in solitude. So he has no friends, like he has no contact with anybody. And then he gets killed, obviously, at the hands of Chimere. The whole thing is just utterly tragic for him, and we barely get any time with him. And he's probably one of the most interesting forms of a Jedi that we've seen, because you don't see very many Wookiee Jedi, and like the way he was used just sucks.
I could not add anything better than what you just said. That's
Thank
great.
you.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, there's a ton of tragedies. The children from the start, I think Leslie Headland said this in an interview, they were failed by all the institutions, by the Jedi, by the witches. Yeah. Nobody protected these children and looked out for them and had the best interest for them in mind. And the Jedi being in there and interfering, like all the stuff that happened caused all of their lives to be messed up. And then at the end, Vanessa just covering everything up. And we haven't seen how her life plays out, but yeah, there's a ton of tragic.
I actually disagree with something you just said, and maybe you're just quoting Leslie Headland, but like, I don't.
Oh, the institutions.
I don't think Osha was failed, in the sense of she wanted to be a Jedi. Like when we meet her there by the tree and stuff, that's all she's talking about is wanting to be a Jedi, and like that's all she wants to do. It's very clearly that's where she's being called. Soul knew that, felt that, and paved the road for her to live that dream. He even said that to her, like, I gave you your dream. And his attachment to her, almost like a father, was his failure, because Jedi aren't supposed to be attached, right, emotionally. And so I don't think she was failed necessarily in the sense of like she was uprooted from something. She was given what she wanted. The problem is that what she wanted ended up not being what she needed and what she thought she wanted in the end. As we come to find out, she wanted something deeper and something more emotional, which is the dark side. So I don't know. Like,
see,
that's
I
a
think,
gray area.
I think you just proved my point. I think of the Jedi failed her.
The
because
Jedi
they
failed
should
her,
have.
but I don't think Soul failed her. I guess maybe is where I'm going. So
Well, he even said, he's like, maybe I'm not as a good teacher. Like he said that in a previous episode. Yeah, I think she wouldn't have quit the Jedi if they hadn't, like, if they had been there to say you. But how do you let go, right? Like, how do you teach to let go? Her emotion was already messed up, and that's why they don't take them that old. They don't take 8-year-olds for the most part. Like, same thing they said with Anakin.
Well,
you saw how Anakin turned out.
Honestly, like the Jedi are not going to be the type of people to go to for advice on how to work through your
enrollment numbers were down. Let's just be real.
They're the tribe that you go to if your goal is to bury your emotions deep and just not talk about them.
Right.
And that's
I think
kind of how the Jedi thrive, is everything is pushed under the rug like that. They're not actually being honest with their emotions and how they feel about things, because if they really got down to it, then they'd be getting towards attachments and all sorts of things,
which I think is what makes Luke Skywalker such a compelling character, and why I think he was maybe truly the chosen one, if you really want to get into that discussion on a later podcast. But like when Obi-Wan says, "Your inside serve you well," the intuitiveness that Luke had to leveraging his emotions, I think, is what made him so powerful. It wasn't just the level of midichlorians and his actual physical power.
Right.
It was that ability to control and leverage that into intuition. I think that's what a true Jedi does, is they find a way to master and that self-control. Whereas like the dark side is all about giving in to the impulses and giving in to the lack of self-control and just letting your emotions drive you, and things like that. So anyway.
Right. And there should be a balance. Like the Jedi and the Sith are two. That's another thing I like about this series, is almost like at the end of the day, you look at it, the Jedi and the Sith are really two sides of the same coin, and they just have different philosophies. It's almost like Republican, Democrat. Like it's not like one side is necessarily wrong. If you can have a balance between those those ideologies and those standpoints.
We're gonna make the High Republic great again.
Yeah,
we're gonna combine it.
Yeah. I think that overall, just looking at the institution of the Jedi is what I enjoyed about this show, and I hope we get more of a season 2. I hope Disney can give us more. Just like at the end of Ahsoka, it's just frustrating to not know whether this is the end, or actually same thing with Obi-Wan Kenobi. There was like rumors of, they might get another season, and then they're like, no, this is the complete series on Blu-ray. Like Disney was like, no, we're not doing it anymore. So I wish we would just give us a definitive yes or no whether we're going to get another one. That would help me give my final thoughts on the Acolyte. But we're interested, what are your final thoughts on the Acolyte? Season 1 overall, what did you think? this episode 8 individually, I thought was one of the strongest episodes, but I'm curious to know what your thoughts are overall on anything we talked about. We're always curious to hear here on Trust in the Force. Shoff, thank you very much for joining me this whole season for the Acolyte. Hopefully we can come back for Skeleton Key in the future. Mr. Kevin Call, thank you from Fuse Film for joining me and for always inviting me on Fuse Film. We always have a great time over there. You want to plug where you can be found on the internet, Kevin?
Yeah, I think I've mentioned this past, but anywhere at Fused Film. So Instagram, any of the social channels, I'm there. You can also go to my website, thekevincall.com. Occasionally write about movies. I talk about my marketing career. Have some contract work. If you're ever interested in marketing, give me a call.
Nice. Excellent. Well, as always, here on Trust in the Force, we would be honored if you would join us.
Trust only in the Force.